Right people, we have more leaks pointing towards a redesign for iOS 19 because Mark Gurman has told us today the code name for iOS 19 is Solarium. Now if you're wondering what Solarium means, it's a room with glass walls that allow in plenty of sunlight, and so that basically hints at the glass-like appearance that we should see with iOS 19, which should be inspired by Vision OS. Also, Apple's WWDC 2025 logo does hint at a glass-like Vision OS experience, and so yes, we can expect a redesign. Now let's talk about the supported devices for iOS 19 and iPadOS 19. So as a lot of people know, iOS 19 is going to be a major overhaul with a redesign that I'll get later into the video. But because it's going to be such a substantial update, Apple apparently plans to drop the iPhone XS, the XS Max, and the XR, according to a credible anonymous source. These devices were released all the way back in 2018, so they've already had roughly 6 years of support, and so I'm not surprised by this news. The XR especially only has 3 gigs of RAM, and so for those using these devices, just be aware your device may lose support very soon. Now obviously these devices not getting iOS 19 does not suddenly make them unusable. Apple still releases security updates for devices on older versions of iOS, and so you could theoretically keep using these phones for a little longer, but of course eventually apps will stop supporting iOS 18 and then you're going to miss out on some big new features that you want to try out. Also, fun fact, the iPhone XR, XS and XS Max were the last iPhones to have the Apple logo in the original position. The iPhone 11 onwards moved the logo to the middle. After hearing that, you may be thinking, why should I care about that? And to be honest, that is a good question that I don't even have an answer for. I just felt like telling you guys. And you know what else I feel like telling you guys? To click that subscribe button, of course. It's free and will bring you the latest about Apple right to your subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. Join the Saranbyte gang now. Now moving to iPadOS 19, Apple plans to only drop the iPad 7th generation, which has the A10 Fusion from 2016. That is a crazy old chipset, but what's funny is that the iPad 8 generation, which has the A12, which Apple's dropping from the iPhone range, is still going to be supported. This has already happened in the past because the iPhone 7 that had the A10 did not get iOS 16, whereas the iPad 7 with the same A10 got iPadOS 16, 17 and 18, so it seems Apple's happy supporting these iPads for longer because they did technically launch a couple of years later after these iPhones. Does that mean the iPhone XR and XS could run iOS 19 if the iPad 8 generation is getting iPadOS 19? Maybe, but the iPad 7th generation was very sluggish on iPadOS 18, and so there's a possibility the iPad 8 generation also suffers on iPadOS 19. We will have to wait and see. Let's now move on to what exactly we can expect with iOS 19, and by extension iPadOS 19. So Apple leaker Mark Gurman in a new report had reiterated that iOS 19's redesign is going to be big with a capital B. The design principles we saw with Vision OS will be adopted by iOS with a focus on greater transparency and new types of windows and buttons. Wow. And it's not just Gurman claiming this. We have 3 separate sources corroborating on the idea we could see a Vision OS inspired redesign for iOS. Last year, The Verified first mentioned this, but they claimed it would come to iOS 18, which was wrong of course. But John Prosser then highlighted in a recent video, the camera app in iOS 19 would get a major redesign with more translucent Vision OS-like elements that we could see throughout the OS as well. And now we have Mr. Mark Gurman chiming in, also suggesting the same. Also having said Apple's goal is to make Apple's various software platforms more consistent in design, and so these design changes will apply to both iPadOS and macOS as well. That's good because it is odd that we got this big redesign in 2020 for macOS, but those redesigned icons never came to the iPhone or iPads, and so I'm hoping all platforms are based on Vision OS and we have the same general look across all devices. The biggest question on my mind though that no one's answered yet is, are we going to see circular icons or not? This is one of the elements that sets Vision OS apart, and while if they want design consistency, they should bring this over to iOS and iPadOS. Or here's a crazy idea, Apple. Give consumers a choice. Why don't we get to decide the shape of the icons? I mean, Apple is letting us slowly customize the user interface more and more each year, so it would be nice if you could choose between circular and square icons. But I guess the aim is for design consistency, and so maybe everyone's going to be forced to live with circular icons. And actually we have renders that give us a possible first look at the redesign and I like this a lot, guys. So yes, I'll gladly take the new icons. However, I do want to mention John Prosser believes there will be no circular icons, but after seeing this render, I hope he's wrong. But it's not just new icons. I don't want to undermine how radical of a change iOS 19 could be, because in Gurman's words, Apple plans to update the style of icons, menus, apps, Windows system buttons, and the company is going to simplify the way users navigate and control their devices. The changes go well beyond a new design language and aesthetic tweaks apparently, so whilst Gurman isn't giving us any specific details, this certainly does sound exciting. By the way, John Prosser, after showing us the redesigned camera UI, did share some other concepts of how iOS 19 could look like according to his sources. So for example, on the lock screen, the notifications are more translucent, and there's a more 3D floating look for the toggles. Settings and pop-up have a more glassy aesthetic imitating Vision OS. App menus will have more rounded corners and a floating style overall, and the keyboard will get a redesign where it almost creates this illusion of it floating, which sounds cool, but I'll be honest, looking at these renders, it still looks like familiar iOS, and I kinda expected more. Gurman actually thinks these are very old builds and does not give us an accurate idea of the redesign we can expect, hence why I'm only briefly mentioning this because I also have my doubts. Anyway, I know some may argue that we don't need a redesign for iOS, we need stability. In fact, I have a feeling Apple's giving us this major redesign to distract us from the fact Apple Intelligence Siri features have been delayed, and honestly it's a good distraction because whilst AI features in iOS eventually may get useful, they certainly aren't a must-have right now, whereas design changes to the UI is something you would appreciate every single day if of course the execution is good. My only concern are bugs. I'm hoping it's not too buggy, but if Apple's changing so much with iOS 19, you just know those first few betas will be rough, but hopefully public builds are stable. And now let's talk about the brand new phones that will run iOS 19 out of the box, which are the iPhone 17s. So we recently got new models from YouTuber iDeviceHub showing us the new camera modules on the Pro phones, and it's certainly an interesting look. Leakers have been going back and forth on the new camera module we could see with iPhone 17 Pro. For those unaware, initially we were expecting a new horizontal layout similar to the Pixel, which would make this iPhone stand out compared to every other iPhone since the 11 Pro, which has had this stove design layout. However, there is a reason Apple's firmly stuck to this design, and it's not because they're lazy, it's because the lenses are at equal distance from each other, which allows for seamless switching between the lenses, but also the positioning of the camera now helps the iPhone record spatial video, and so moving these lenses could break these key aspects of the camera experience. Hence why other leakers have been suggesting the stove design is going to remain, but Apple's instead going to incorporate a part glass, part aluminium back cover. And that's what we see in these new models too. There's the familiar triple lens layout, but the LiDAR scanner, mic and flash have moved to the right sides, and we have this aluminium panel at the top, and there's going to be a two-tone finish apparently. I guess Apple using a mix of aluminium and glass will make this iPhone kinda similar to the iPhone 5 in this aspect. Now, as much as I do like that Apple's changing things up with the design, this also is still nothing revolutionary, and reminds me of Poco phones if anything, but I think we have to see the real deal before we can properly judge this, and to be fair, the design has grown on me a lot. I am starting to slowly warm up to this. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.